Your country has an internet kill switch. That means they could just cut off all the communication in your country with just a single switch. Now, is that likely? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on what they're trying to do. Now, recent news about Facebook going down, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram all went down. And then at the same time, we have the Facebook whistleblower coming forward. What does this say about our internet, the use of it, what we're able to say, censorship, and the government's ability to turn that on and off? And then what does that mean for us financially and in terms of our freedom of speech? Let's go. All right, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name is Mark Moss, and I make videos to change the way you think about money, but sometimes I have to go a little bit broader than just money so you can understand what's going on in the world, because these are the policies that drive your money. Now, lately, there's been a lot of news of what's going on with Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, all going down, obviously. And then at the exact same time, we have this mysterious whistleblower that shows up out of nowhere, talking about how Facebook is bad, how they're evil, and how the government should do something to censor the information online. Of course, all the news medias have picked this up. All the outlets have picked this up. It's big news. Censor the internet, censor Facebook, and of course they've jumped on that. So let's take a look at that. So we can see, obviously, as you're already aware, like I said a few days ago, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp went down. They say this was because there was problems with their servers and whatnot. But like I said, coincidentally, it happened right at the same time as this whistleblower came out. Her name is Frances Haugen, and she's been testifying everywhere. She's been testifying before the U.S. Congress. Now she's been invited over to Europe to talk to them about the ways Facebook is evil, as if we didn't already know. But more importantly, what the government should do to take serious actions to restrict it. But let's go even a little bit further. Now, have you heard about the internet kill switch? So the internet kill switch is basically what it sounds like, a single switch that the government could just basically shut off the entire internet, which would obviously have massive implications, including work would go down, but all communications would go down. So is that possible? Do they have the power? And more than just having the power, are they able to use it? Well, this article poses, what would happen if the President of the United States deemed it necessary for, check this out, quote unquote, national security? So you've probably realized by now that everything is becoming an emergency. Part of the reason why everything is becoming an emergency is because they believe that it gives them extra powers. In times of an emergency, they can do certain things they wouldn't be able to do in an emergency. Now, I haven't read personally anywhere in the Constitution that says the Constitution is the law of the land. Unless there's an emergency, then it all gets thrown away. It's not the case. But for some reason, they think that is the case. And of course, that's being challenged. We're watching that all play out. So in the event of a quote unquote national emergency, a cyber emergency, potentially the president might think they have the power to do that. So they could, but do they have the ability? Well, we've already seen this happen in multiple countries. As a matter of fact, we've seen it happen in Cuba recently, just a few months ago. The citizens were out there rallying in the streets, protesting against lack of food. That seems to be the number one trigger for any type of revolution, and things like that. Medicine, electricity outages, all those things were happening. And as the people came out, and information started getting leaked, little video clips started showing up online of what was going on in Cuba, the police came out in force and just squashed that. But what they had to also do, they couldn't allow that information to get out, so the entire internet was shut down. Now, what's interesting about Cuba is that then the United States was all of a sudden talking about what they should do to bring internet usage back to Cuba. So it's kind of interesting. Of course, China, they have been shutting down the internet in certain areas of the country. Many times we've seen that happening. Of course, they have the Great Firewall of China that blocks things. But we've seen this happen over and over and over. Most notably, before the pandemic, remember the Hong Kong, China situation. And as Hong Kong was pushing back, they were shutting down not just the internet, but they're also shutting down cell phone service as well. Of course, we've seen it in Egypt, Iran, Zimbabwe, South Sudan, Zambia, Colombia, and on and on and on. You get the idea. It's been done a lot. Now, back to the United States, is it possible? Well, they're saying that there's this little law from 1930s that somehow might give the president the power to do this, or the ability to do that. Now, of course, this was written at a time when there was no internet. This was just about radio, but they said that the president might have the ability to shut down any of these communications, and they think it could fit into that. We'll see about that. But the problem really comes back to this national emergency situation. We're reminded many, many, many times by our founding fathers of the United States, like here Thomas Jefferson says that the natural progress of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain ground. So if we go back through all of history since the beginning of time, it's the same old story that just repeats, right? You've seen my work on cycles. I'll go ahead and attach it right up here if you haven't. But basically there's these three revolutionary cycles that are converging, one of which is like this political, social, cultural cycle I talk about. And basically, we can see it just keep repeating, where basically we have, humans are free, a few people get a little bit of power, and then they continue to get more and more and more power. As it says right here, Thomas Jefferson, liberty yields to the government gains ground. So the government gets bigger, 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 more oppressive, until finally the people can't take it anymore. They revolt, overthrow it, back to freedom, and it just repeats over and over and over again. And so that's it. And they've warned us many times about this problem happening, and specifically, Benjamin Franklin said, those that are willing to give up their freedom for safety will get neither, or deserve neither. We can see one of my favorite Austrian economists, F.A. Hayek, says right here, emergencies have always been the pretext. So it's always been about emergencies. Emergencies have always been the pretext on which the safeguards of individual liberty have been eroded. Always been. Now, he wrote this a long time ago, and of course, we're witnessing this happening right now. And he says, once they're suspended, it's not difficult for anyone who has assumed such emergency powers to see to it that the emergency persists. Like I said, this was written decades and decades ago, but it just couldn't be any more true than the time that Thomas Jefferson said it, or that Hayek said it as well. And so, could they potentially use some sort of a emergency to do this? Well, let's take a look at this. First off, we know that there was a bill put together. Before we jump into that, so there was a bill put together by Rep. Tulsi Gabbard, and she was saying, hey, let's get rid of the internet kill switch. No one should wield that power. The president shouldn't have that power. Let's get rid of it. And you can see right here is on congress.gov. This is the actual bill that was put together in September of 2020. And of course, guess what? They shut it down, right? They didn't want that to happen. And of course, we know that because back to F.A. Hayek's quote here, he says that they'll never cede it, right? It says that it is difficult for anyone who has assumed such emergency powers to see to it that the emergency persists. They don't want to give it up. And that's exactly what the case was. Now, could this be used in some sort of a cyber emergency that gives them this power? Well, let's take a look at that. So here's an article on MSN, and this was from a few months ago. You might have remembered this story where basically the Colonial Pipeline was hacked. Hackers got in and they did what's known as a ransomware attack, where they basically locked down the software, or the computers, and said, hey, you got to give us money or we don't open that back up. Now, you can see that the U.S. government declared a state of emergency on Sunday after the largest fuel pipeline in the U.S. was hit by a ransomware attack. Now, this was not a state of emergency against the internet, luckily, but it could have been. They did a state of emergency against the Colonial Pipeline, in which they mobilized trucks to get oil being transported to free up that stuck oil because fuel prices were rising, shortages were happening, et cetera. But they could have easily, it wouldn't be that far off to see how they could just make the state of emergency against the internet and get that much power. Now, would they do that? It's not that far off, especially like I said in today, where we see all these emergencies happening, and we can see that it might even be somewhat planned, at least being prepared for. Now, if you've been following what's been happening with the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, and of course the pandemic that we've been dealing with, you know by now that they ran a simulation, a test of the pandemic before it happened. Coincidence? Maybe, but now they're running the same simulations for cyber threats. for cyber pandemics. Now, could there be another cyber pandemic after they run the simulations? Well, if history is our guide, then it tells us there maybe is. Let's listen to this video directly from the World Economic Forum about what they say here.
You see, the only way to stop the exponential propagation of a COVID-like cyber threat is to fully disconnect the millions of vulnerable devices from one another and from the internet. All of this in a matter of days. A single day without the internet would cost our economies more than $50 billion, and that's before considering the economic and societal damages should these devices be linked to essential services such as transport or healthcare. As the digital realm increasingly merges with our physical world, the ripple effects of cyber attacks on our safety just keep on expanding at a faster pace than what we're preparing for. COVID-19 was known as an anticipated risk. So is the digital equivalent. Let's be better prepared for that one. The time is now.
There you have it, right from the World Economic Forum in their own voice, telling you that we weren't as prepared as we should have been for the pandemic, and now we should be better prepared for a cyber pandemic, which they say is most likely coming. And so if they say that, then we should probably be prepared for that as well. Now, if we jump into Wikipedia, we can see that there is the internet kill switch. We can see that it's a measure to activate a single shut-off mechanism for the internet traffic. So as the World Economic Forum says, that if there was some sort of attack, that it could cause massive harm, massive damage. And so before it spreads, before it infects all these devices like a virus would, we want to be able to shut everything down to prevent that from happening. And this goes on to talk about how we've seen it happen in China, Egypt, United Kingdom, etc. And so it's all there. Now, this could be a big problem, especially if you rely on the internet, which of course everybody does at this point. Now, if they're planning for it, it might be something that you want to plan for as well. But good news, there are ways to get around that. So just because China shuts down access to the internet doesn't mean all access is shut down. We've seen this happen many times before. So there are ways to route around being deplatformed with decentralized technology. And so we're seeing this play out over and over and over. Now, this is all part of this Great Reset agenda where, of course, by 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. I'm not going to be happy with that. I am having a live event where we're going to talk about this specifically, and more importantly, how to prepare for that, how to build your wealth, how to protect your wealth, how to protect your assets and your health and your freedom. We're going to talk about all that. It's a live event with some of the best speakers in the world coming to talk about those topics. So if you want to learn how to survive and thrive through this period, check out, there's a link down below. But like I said, there are practical applications for this. There's ways to bypass internet censorship. Of course, one of the easiest ways is just to use a VPN. You can download and install a VPN, which will then route you around your ISP, which is your internet service provider, which can then get you access to the web. This is how people in China get around the Great Firewall and use applications that are banned, including Facebook and those types of things, and do Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as well. So a VPN is a really good way to do that. Of course, there's also new networks that are coming up called distributed networks. And so we have, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Those are centrally controlled networks or databases. And now we're starting to see distributed networks. So of course, Bitcoin is that decentralized technology, but we're seeing something known as the Fediverse. And this is something that's built on Mastodon. And so it kind of uses this distributed network like Bitcoin does. And we're starting to see Facebook copies and Twitter copies and so forth being built on these distributed networks. That would be impossible, if not very difficult to shut down. We can see that the internet is actually a stack in multiple layers, where you have the physical internet, which of course is the wire, the fiber optics in the ground, the routers, the switches, etc. Then you have the IP level that routes the traffic, the TCP, and then the top is the DNS, the domain name servers. And so while they can shut down those layers, unless they go physically dig up those fiber optics in the ground, which I would say is probably not going to happen, then there's ways to route around their restrictions, and we're seeing that. Something else that's been very, very popular lately is these mesh networks. I was at Costco recently, and they were running Wi-Fi routers for your house that are mesh networks, and basically that means they repeat the signal, so it builds it out bigger. But what we can do is we can run mesh networks to our own phones, and so we can turn our phones into a network. So if a bunch of us had this mesh networking, and the internet service provider shut us off, and the cell phone companies shut us off, we could create our own network to talk. Of course, we saw that happening in Hong Kong. Before the pandemic, we saw where China was coming into Hong Kong, and the protesters were using mesh networks to connect because, of course, they had no cell phone connection because it was all shut down. And so they used this mesh networking. Now, what's really cool is a lot of people say, well, what happens to Bitcoin in this type of event? And we're seeing now, like this Global Mesh Labs, they're creating this open source mesh network where if you lost internet access and phone service, we could still use our devices to create our own networks, and they could get really big depending on how many people use them. And now we could even send Bitcoin over the mesh networks. And so it's a very interesting time. The more the governments try to squeeze and hold that power, the more people push back, the more entrepreneurs are mobilized. And I've said, wait until you see what the entrepreneurs are capable of when their backs are against the wall. Always bet on the entrepreneurs, always bet on innovation. And we're seeing that. And what's interesting is that as technology is advancing, it's just advancing too fast for the state. So the more they squeeze, the more people push back, and it's starting to make them look a little bit incompetent and a little bit irrelevant. A couple examples of that obviously would be China banning Bitcoin, I think now for the 9th time. And why do they have to ban it over and over? That's because it didn't work the first, second, third, fourth, and so forth. We're also seeing in other areas. So, for example, in Europe, a couple weeks ago, we saw several people, I think 30 people signed of the ECB to ban anonymous crypto wallets. But okay, because I could just create like 1 million of them right now. They're digital, no one would know. And so it's impossible for them to enforce that, and it just makes them look irrelevant. We saw in the United States a few weeks ago, I think 20 Democrats signed onto a bill to ban 3D printed guns. And, regardless of what side you're on, that's code. I can just know it in my head. Like, how can they ban me knowing code in my head? They can't. It's impossible to enforce, and it only continues to make them more irrelevant. So while they may want to shut down the internet, while they might have a plan to actually shut down the internet per the World Economic Forum, there are ways for us to get around it if you know what you're doing. And so that's an important thing to understand. Be prepared for it. Have a plan for it. That's the way that we succeed, is by understanding what the threats are, and like I said, having a plan. If you don't have a plan, come to my live event. We are going to be talking about this, like I said, 15 experts about how to build, grow, and protect your wealth, protect your assets, your freedom, your health, etc. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to hang out. Come meet all the speakers. There's a link down below. Other than that, what do you think? Do you think the threat of having the internet shut down is real? Especially in light of these emergency powers that are erupting and the plan for the World Economic Forum that they want to run these tests? Leave me a comment and let me know. Maybe I'm crazy, or maybe you agree. Either way, let me know. Of course, as always, give me a thumbs up on this video if you like it. If you don't like the video, give me a thumbs down. But either way, at least leave me a comment and let me know what you think. All right, and that's what I got for today. To your success. I'm out.